Hello, my people. No costume today. I could not think of anything. Afterwards, you can tell me if you can think of something I should have worn. But did you watch the cartoon? I thought it was really fun. Loved the guy's accent. Those videos are, to me, a great way to learn about. If you're like I am and you're at all a visual learner, I think it's a great way to learn about the Bible. So, people love a spectacle. We all love a show. A show is fun. Um, you know, television prosperity preachers have taken advantage of the fact that people love a show. They will put on elaborate presentations, and it'll be a spectacle. And they'll tell you that if you send them your money, that you will receive a blessing. And sometimes they even have demonstrations of healing power. But of course, the people who are healed are usually the people who have donated money. And a lot of people have been let down by these ministries. One of them tried to take advantage of my grandmother back in the 80s. And that happens a lot where older people are encouraged to send more money than they can afford to send. The problem that we have today is the same problem that the Israelites had back then. And that is, we don't always know who's telling the truth. Which of the gods that the Israelites were worshiping was the true God, and how did they figure it out? So that's what today is about, is how they figured that out. So, a little bit of background. We hear about, in the video, the little cartoon showed this a little bit, but we hear about Elijah earlier. He went to Ahab and told him, a drought is coming because you guys are going to be punished, or we're all going to be punished for the evil that Ahab and his government were doing, which included the worship of Baal, and actually child sacrifice was part of what Ahab did. I mean, I'm telling you, he was an evil dude. And a drought was a big deal as a punishment for the people because Baal, B-A-A-L, Baal was a storm god. And he was the god of rain and fertility. So a drought was a direct challenge to Baal's power. And the drought lasted for 3 years. And after 3 years, Elijah asks to meet with Ahab, and he tells him to bring your 450 prophets of Baal and bring all the people of Israel, and we're going to talk. We're going to talk. So that's what they were doing. And he proposed a contest. The contest would be between Yahweh, who is God, and Baal. And in that, if you read the passage, Elijah in there he's pretty funny, but he makes fun of the people. He accuses them of kind of wobbling back and forth and being very indecisive, crippled by indecision. Are you going to decide for Baal? Or are you going to decide for Yahweh? You need to decide. And he challenges them to decide, but they stay quiet. So then you hear Elijah's sarcasm in this passage. I mean, it's really pretty funny. I wish somebody would do a movie about this, but so Elijah proposes this contest, and he says that each side is going to have an opportunity to display their God's power by calling on the God to burn up the offering. So everybody thought, well, that's a good idea, because, they're like we are. They want something to tell them, somebody to tell them which is the truth and which is the lie. So Elijah set the conditions, and he let the other side have first pick, who was very polite. And he told them, you're going to call on the name of your God. And back then, the original translation for name, that implies that the identity, the reputation of your God is being established here. So you're going to have the opportunity to establish your God's reputation. So verse 26, I just want to read it because I just love the way he says it. So they took the bull that was given them, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, crying, "Oh, Baal, answer us!" But there was no voice and no answer. They limped about the altar that they had made. So the prophets of Baal are looking pretty foolish at this point, and Baal was silent. They were dancing around or limping around, just begging Baal to answer, but they were silent. And then he was silent. And then verse 27, at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud. Surely he is a god. Either he's meditating, or he's wandered away, or he's on a journey, or maybe he's asleep and you need to wake him up." Just love that. He's trash talking them. I mean, he's totally trash talking them. And he's implying that they failed to take care of their God. Like, you guys need to take better care of your God. Or that the God was so lazy that he's taking naps in the middle of the day, and that's why they couldn't wake him. In the student book that you hopefully read, Dr. Gardner, and if you didn't, it's okay. Dr. Gardner says that Elijah may have appeared to be a little arrogant. And the reason that Dr. Gardner was saying that is because I think he didn't want to give the impression that acting that way is acceptable. It's not okay to act the way Elijah acted in this day and age. He was arrogant if you looked at it from our point of view. But we have to remember that this wasn't just a conflict between two legitimate faith systems. This was not the kind of conversation that would happen between you and somebody who believed in Islam or Judaism, because that would be so disrespectful, and we would never do that. And so that's what Dr. Gardner was kind of saying, is that would not be an okay way to handle it. But this was a cosmic battle with deadly serious consequences between the one true God and people who were totally confused. So very different from any situation we would face today. So it was not arrogant, even though it would be if he did something like that in today's understanding. But Elijah could see the destruction that was coming. If they didn't turn away from their idolatry and turn toward God, it was going to be bad. It was going to be bad. Also, this shows his kind of arrogance, apparent arrogance, also shows how confident he was in God. I mean, he was so confident in God. I mean, wouldn't we all love to have that confidence? Just say, I mean, that was really cool. So the prophets try one last time to get the attention by cutting themselves. And apparently that was a common practice of Canaanite priests to get their God's attention, would be to cut themselves. Kind of dramatic and drastic. And then it was Elijah's turn. First thing he did was he got the people closer. That was a brilliant tactic, because he was about to bring them closer in faith. So he brought them physically closer first. And symbolically, as people, that's an important precursor to actually coming spiritually closer, is getting physically closer. It's kind of like the whole idea of going to church. You start off going to church, and then the Spirit starts working on you. So first Elijah repairs the altar, and notice that he doesn't just talk about the tribes that were part of the northern kingdom where he was at the time. He does not ignore the southern kingdom tribes. He includes the whole people of God. He reminds them that the 12 stones that Moses used to build an altar at the foot of Mount Sinai after the reading of the commandments, he's basically reminding them of that story. Then he prepares a sacrifice, and he does it with deliberately and carefully. And then he says, pour water on it. Pour water on it 3 times. That thing was drenched. There was going to be no doubt that this was a big deal, what God was about to do, because it was so wet. Then Elijah called on God, and he used a pretty simple prayer. He acknowledged the name of God, Yahweh, and he acknowledged that the fact that this was the God who made the covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, or Jacob. And he stated that he served Yahweh, and that everything he had done was in Yahweh's bidding. This was no magic trick. And it was important that he distinguish himself from a magician, because in that area of the world at that time, they would use magic to either control the gods or to convince people that they controlled the gods. So it was important. He made this isn't me. He wasn't doing it. He's saying, I'm not doing it. God is doing it. And then he begged God pretty much. And he wanted God to answer so that the people would know that Yahweh was God. In Hebrew, the translation for knowing in verse 37 means like knowing intimately, experiencing God, understanding something about God. So this was a deeper kind of knowing than just like, hey, I know God. The other reason that Elijah wanted God to answer is to change the hearts of the people, to bring them back to trusting God, to lining up their own actions and their own will with God. So in all of this, the spectacle was not the point, even though it must have been a remarkable spectacle. But that wasn't the point. What Elijah wanted, what God wanted, was for the people to turn back to God. So then it happens. And I mean, it must have been spectacular, a spectacle of the best kind, huge demonstration of power. And the people responded appropriately. They fell down on their faces and they acknowledged that Yahweh was their sovereign God. Yeah. So they responded as you hoped they would. Whether or not that lasted, it didn't. But, it was good for the moment. The people of Israel had sinned against God, and they'd experienced a drought. They had failed to remain steadfast to the covenant that God had made with their ancestors. And this scene on Mount Carmel is the new beginning for the people as they once again affirmed their connection with Israel's God and swore their allegiance and loyalty to God.